Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was not only Secretary of State, he was Director of the CIA, a congressman from Kansas, a veteran of the Army, first in his class at West Point, and number one in his law school at Harvard Law. Now he's a movie star. I found in preparing to talk to him about the G20 that he and Ambassador David Friedman have gone out. They're true friends of Israel, and they have made a movie, Route 60, the Biblical Highway. Before we go to policy, Mr. Secretary, congratulations. I have never heard of Route 60 until I saw this. Tell me about it.
Well, Hugh, thanks. It's good to be with you again. It was Ambassador Friedman's idea that we would walk this biblical route from Nazareth in the north to Beersheba in the south through Jerusalem, and we would tell stories from his perspective as an Orthodox Jew and mine as an evangelical Christian, and we would share with the world Judea and Samaria. People have pictures of stones and rockets and smoke and bad things, and we wanted to remind them that this is an important place for evangelical Christians, for Jews, for all members of the Abrahamic faith. And so the movie comes out. It's in theaters across America next week on Monday and Tuesday. I hope folks will go see it, take their Bible study, take their friends. It was a lot of fun to make, and it tells this important story about this incredibly important place. And, you know, we did it in spite of the Screen Actors Guild, Hugh. We didn't strike.
I'm a member of that union, so I'm on strike, Mr. Secretary, but I'm going to cross the picket line and go. It's Monday and Tuesday of next week, a week from yesterday and the day before?
Yeah, that's right. And you can go find the theater near you. It's on route60.movie.
I am really looking forward to that. Now, Mr. Secretary, I reached out to you without knowing about that because the G20 left me reeling. Last night, Chris Christie I went down to a Christie event. I go to all the events in New Hampshire for candidates that I can. And he said, quite bluntly, President Biden does not have the physical or mental capacity to be president. I think that showed through, and I think it's extremely dangerous. Respectful though I am, what do you think of this situation?
We can see it. The world can see it. I still travel a fair amount, and I have people all across the world, Europe, and the Middle East, and Asia, asking, what's going on? We clearly have a president who has served his country for 5 decades now, but who is no longer, forget leading, he simply isn't demonstrating the basic fundamental competence to execute the mission of the presidency of the United States of America. That is a tough job. It is a big job. And I think, a president who is literally played off stage with music and who answers a question by saying, I'm going to bed, is not someone that ought to be the president of the United States of America. It's too important a task for us and for the world.
Now, you have met with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. You've met with Xi. You've met with, I don't know if you met with Putin. Did you meet with Putin?
I did, a couple of times.
Okay, so what do these killers think of someone as infirm as the president?
They think in a system like ours, it confuses them because they struggle to understand how someone who hasn't been able to demonstrate that he can, work the hours required, run a process to get to good decisions and outcomes, and then lead and demonstrate that result. They don't know what to make of it. They're confused, and they then watch the policies, Hugh. So separate this from the person. They watch this administration give billions of dollars to the Iranians, allow 13 Americans to be killed in Afghanistan. They allow the Russians to close a pipeline. We forget this. The very part of the Biden administration, first part of the Biden administration, they closed a pipeline in America, and we did nothing. Xi Jinping is staring at this and thinking, well, this may well be the moment when I can extend my empire in the way that I've wanted to do for so long. Deterrence is really at risk, Hugh.
And it's not just the bad guys. I saw a picture of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia shaking hands with President Biden. Crown Prince is 40 years old. Joe Biden is 80 years old. Crown Prince is going to be the king for 3 decades, 4 decades if his health holds out. What do you think he thinks of Joe Biden's appeal to do anything?
Goodness, the only good thing that came out of the G20 was this agreement between India, the Emirates, the Saudis, and the United States. I applaud all of them for that, to connect those countries economically through energy and commerce. That's good stuff. But I'm confident that each of those leaders, to your point, our adversaries see weakness, and our friends, our partners, our allies, those with whom we work, they don't know if they've got a trusted, reliable partner on the other side. And so when they see President Biden clearly struggling in the way that he is, they ask themselves, how can I hedge my risk in the event that I don't have that reliable counterparty in the way that they had for 4 years when President Trump and I were in office.
Now, Mr. Secretary, when I was driving up, return driving, and my wife was driving the car, so I was able to read when it came up in real time, David Ignatius' new column. And I want to quote it to you first, but I think David Ignatius is rightly esteemed by left and right, and he is certainly well connected with everyone at both of the places you led, both the agency and the State Department. Is that a fair statement of fact?
That is an understatement to say well connected. Yes, that's true.
He is like the Beltway, walking around personified. Here is what he wrote today. Biden has never been good at saying no. He should have resisted the choice of Vice President Harris, who was a colleague of his beloved son, Beau, when they were both states' attorney general. Biden should have blocked then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, which has done considerable damage to the island's security. Biden should have stopped his son Hunter from joining the board of a Ukrainian gas company and representing companies in China. And Biden certainly should have resisted Hunter's attempt to impress clients by getting dad on the phone. That's an earthquake, Mr. Secretary. What did you think when you read that?
I agree. Although I will say, I've had my moments with David Ignatius where he and I have gone at it pretty good. But he often presents a credible narrative of what he's hearing in those very places you described, not just in the institutions themselves, but in a greater Washington, D.C., left of center and progressive politics. So I think that's not just David's view. I think that is an emerging consensus view. As for the substance of those, I think he's largely right about each of them. Those were bad decisions, but that list is pretty long, Hugh. The list of decisions that President Biden has made have absolutely weakened our nation abroad and made our friends really worried about American resolve. So we really have a keel in the water. The model of President Reagan of peace through strength. Are they serious about doing this? Instead, they've put climate change, they've put diversity, equity, inclusion at the top of their national security priorities, and that's greatly in line with David Ignatius. That is, he just can't say no. When the progressive left comes calling, President Biden has demonstrated he is willing to bend a knee to them every single time.
Now, Mr. Secretary, you know what impeachments do to the executive branch, but you're also a member of the House. And I like to remind people you're on the Benghazi Committee, and you know how the House operates. Do you think an impeachment inquiry is ill-advised or well-advised at this point, or do you have to be in the House to make that judgment?
It's probably the case that the more data you have, so if I was a member, I'd have even a better judgment. But I actually think, given what I have seen publicly, it's a pretty reasonable next step. Mr. Ignatius talked about, we now know some things, right? The New York Times or the Axios can say whatever they want about no evidence, but we have indisputed evidence that President Biden got the Ukrainian prosecutor fired. He claimed it himself. We have undisputed evidence that Hunter was on a board of a company for which he was wholly unqualified, and then the two of them were on phone calls selling the Biden brand. I think there's lots of questions to ask, and so I actually think it's a very reasonable proposition to, in a very fact-based, measured way, continue to inquire and see the scope and extent of President Biden's connectivity while in office, not when he was just a dad, but while he was the Vice President of the United States. Did he, in fact, use his office, our office, the American Vice Presidency, in a way that benefited him and his family that was inappropriate? I think it's very reasonable.
All right, Mr. Secretary, I want to turn to the debates. You have watched politics for decades unfold on TV. I'm sure you watched the first debate with our friends Brett Baer and Martha McCollum asking questions. Second debate's coming up next week. From a national security standpoint, what would you like Dana Perino, Stuart Varney, and other, I can't remember the third host, to ask of our candidates?
I think there's three things. The first is sort of granularly, tell me what it is that you're prepared to do to protect America at home from the threat of the Chinese Communist Party. Think counterintelligence, think our universities and schools that the Chinese Communist Party has come to infiltrate. Those are hard problem sets, and I'd love to see a candidate who has thought long and hard about how to protect not just the Taiwan Straits and not just the South China Sea, but the United States proper from the Chinese Communist Party's United Front, their propaganda campaigns here in the United States. And what does that mean commercially for the United States? How do we deal with American businesses who are caught in that twist? Second, when the Republican model has always, the Republican Party's always had an element, the Buchanan wing, the Ron and Rand Paul wing of our party. I hope they'll ask candidates, are you prepared to continue to lead with a model that looks like one that has been successful for our country in the post-World War II system. If not, talk about it, explain why not, explain why you think it's better to be home and be an isolationist, defend that vigorously, but ask them to get one level between just these top-line notional discussions and ask them, tell me what that means. How does that translate to resources spent in Europe? How does that translate to recruiting for armed forces? How does that translate into building America's industrial base? Are you prepared to go on national TV from the Oval Office and defend American power as good for the American people? If they get to those two things one level below the discussion that's been had today, I think the American people will be able to make better decisions about the things that really matter to them and their families.
Now, we have about a minute and a half left, which is what a candidate gets. If a host asks them, what is your policy on assistance to Ukraine? What do you recommend in the best interest of the United States be their answer?
Full-throated, immediate capabilities that the Ukrainians can bring to bear in real time with de minimis training, not just hardware, which is what often gets talked about, but we need to provide them intelligence, training, strategic advice so that they can successfully win. Reagan talked about we win, they lose. We need to make sure that Vladimir Putin can never say to the world he won this conflict. This aggression is dangerous not just for Ukraine, but for Latvia, Lithuania, Moldova, all of Europe, and therefore for things that matter to people in Arizona and Tennessee and Wyoming.
But then the follow-up will be, is that an open-ended commitment for years? Is it Vietnam?
We must win. We must continue to provide those tools. We don't have to deal with the question of open-endedness if we actually deliver on things that can close the end. What we've done to date is we've strung this along. This could well have been over had we deterred in advance or provided the systems and processes they needed in a way that the Biden administration refused to do because it was just feared that they'd provoke Vladimir Putin. That was a mistake, and President Reagan knew that. When you go in piecemeal, you often end up precisely where we are today.
Mr. Secretary Mike Pompeo, thank you for joining me. I'll be in theater on Monday or Tuesday to see Route 60. Fascinating project. Go to Route 60. Is it Route60movie.com? Oh, he's gone. Oh, well, I'll find it and I'll tell you after the break. Stay tuned, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt.